Professor Pai, thank you so much for joining me today. I was wondering if, first of all, I guess if you agree with the premise that lawyers kind of serve as like gatekeepers in the modern world, or at least historically.
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by gatekeepers. I mean, a lot of what technological development is a response to incentives, and the law is a pretty powerful creator of incentives. And so, by both by lawmaking and how we decide cases and how we litigate cases, we have an opportunity in the law to affect the development, the speed, and also the direction of technological advancement. And the word gatekeeper to me seems a little bit like you're keeping people out. And so there is this sort of implication that we may slow or stop development in certain areas. Now, certainly that seems to be the case that we do sometimes think about doing that. For example, we want to maybe slow or control the pace of development of nuclear weapons. And more
Mm.
recently, there's a lot of talk about legislation or some sort of legal action to control the development of generative AI. Because there's the thought that if this gets out of hand, then it could be really dangerous. I happen not to agree with that, but there is a lot of discussion about the latent dangers that AI may present, and the thought is that maybe some sort of legal action would be advisable to stem the dangers that are associated with that. But also, I think with cryptocurrencies, a lot of technology. I mean, I don't. Yeah. So, in terms of your characterization as lawyers being gatekeepers, I think a lot of times people have the idea that we ought to be, but I am skeptical about how effective we are at that. And in general, I don't think historically we've had that role. I think the better way of thinking about it is that we control the incentives and create the incentives for technological advancement.
That is a very interesting take. I'm glad that you mentioned the historical role of lawyers. And I do hope that in our conversation, we'll get to talk a little bit about generative AI, at least, and blockchain technology and stuff like that. But I was hoping maybe we could talk a little bit about kind of the historical role, I guess, that lawyers have played in this context. I know that um, a lot of like the way that our world is shaped today has a lot to do with powerful litigators and has a lot to do with the important ideas that have been played out in court. One such is our financial institutions, right?
Hmm.
And kind of like the precepts that we have of our financial institutions all sort of stem from the important cases that have been litigated in the Supreme Court and otherwise. Could you tell me a little bit about how history has played out in terms of like the power that litigators have had on changing our modern world today?
Yeah, sure. So I think oftentimes when we think about the relationship between law and innovation and technology, the thought is that copyright law and patent law and those sorts of things are creating incentives. The administrative state and developments in constitutional law in the 20th century, I think, tend to have more of a breaking tendency that if copyright and patents are the accelerator, then I think a lot of times the regulatory state puts the brakes on development. And these, in the abstract, that might sound like a bad thing because generally most people just think technology is good, that technology makes the world better, makes people's lives better. And there is also, I think, in the spirit of American innovation, this idea of running fast and breaking things, and that's a good thing, that we try things out and we make mistakes, and maybe people get hurt a little bit, but it's worth it that some people get a little bit hurt if the net payoff for society is positive. And we can contrast the way we do technology to, say, Europe. I mean, Europe does not have big tech, right? Compared to the United States, almost all of the big tech and technological innovations coming from the United States, and it's because we allow people to run fast and break things, and Europe is heavily regulatory. Nevertheless, it's not like we don't have federal level regulations, and that really gets started in, as you say, the progressive era. Um, and it really ramps up after FDR, where you have the sort of alphabet soup of agencies that try to regulate things. But you might think that's a bad thing, but it's not. I think there's a question of finding a balance. This is always the question in law. is how much freedom do you want to allow and how much regulation? I mean, in the abstract, like if you abstract out all the variables in a perfect world, right? The libertarian idea that markets tend towards efficiency is true, right? I mean, it's an economic theorem that without market failures, allowing everybody just to do their own thing and to pursue their own goals will result in what is socially efficient, what is the optimum welfare. The problem, of course, with that premise is that it's just not true that there aren't market failures. There's market failures all over the place, and so you need regulations. And so the question is, how is the price we pay for regulation more costly than the benefits of that regulation? And in certain examples, like if you think about environmental regulations, I mean, of course, environmental regulations slow down development. You can't build as much. You have to be more careful when you introduce new technologies onto the market. You can't produce as much of it because, of course, you have to build all these factories that pollute. And so any environmental regulation is going to have the effect of slowing down the progress of technology. That doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't have environmental regulations, obviously, right?
Yeah,
So you have to
absolutely.
figure out what the balance of that is. But I think that the development of the administrative state is essentially the development of a regulatory state, and that means that it's more difficult for businesses to try new things and to run fast and break things.